So, Stephen Hicks is the Professor of Philosophy at Rockford University. He's the Executive Director for the Centre of Ethics and Entrepreneurship, and also author of 5 books, the two most notable being, firstly, Explaining Postmodernism, Skepticism and Socialism from Rousseau to Foucault, first published in 2004, and then an expanded edition published in 2011. He was also the author of Nietzsche and the Nazis, which was published in 2010. In addition to being quite an erudite and primarily a philosopher, Stephen Hicks is also a visiting professor at many universities across the world. His book, Explaining Postmodernism, has gained immensely in relevance in the last few years. Hicks was quite early in predicting the social significance that this particular ideology would have upon the world and certain cultural groups within it. Plus, although we don't really go into it in this chat due to time constraints and poor time management from myself, Hicks is an expert on Nietzsche, and his book on Nietzsche and the Nazis does a terrific job at analyzing this fascinating timestamp in history. There was a documentary film made from that book, which is free for you to watch on YouTube as well, the link for which I will provide in the description of this video. I was quite nervous and really very excited coming into this chat with Stephen. I'm afraid that my nervousness kind of shows a little bit as I slip up on some names and some dates, but he was absolutely wonderful and so kind and really a pleasure to speak with. So hopefully the articulation and a little bit less nervousness and a little bit more direction with my questions will come with practice, but time will tell. You will see that in the video, there is a slight edit on one of the topics when we spoke about art. I edited in Duchamp where Stephen said Dali. I brought up Dali incorrectly earlier in the chat and then failed to recorrect it as it was going. So it's my fault, but I just want to let you guys know that that's what happened when you see the edit, because it is quite noticeable when you see the edit. So in this chat, we're going to talk about Black Lives Matter, Objectivism versus Subjectivism, education, art, Hicks's formative years, and more. So all the questions are going to be timestamped in the description of the video, in addition to the pinned comment. We'll also have the timestamps as well. All right, no more dilly-dallying. I really hope you enjoy it, and here is Stephen Hicks.
So, good morning, Stephen, over in the Chicago area.
All right, good morning, Ryan. Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, mate, it's my absolute pleasure. I'm over the moon that you've agreed to chat. I will have given you an introduction to this video, so we don't have to go through it fully. But you are probably best known for authoring Explaining Postmodernism. However, you, of course, also have a lot of other interests and work that you've done, specifically around business ethics, but then philosophy primarily. And I imagine you are quite an erudite when it comes to many other topics as well. So starting off with the questions, I wanted to sort of start in the aesthetics because there is a quote that you feature quite prominently on your website. It's from Steve Jobs. And the quote goes, when you're a carpenter making a beautiful chest of drawers, you're not going to use a piece of plywood on the back, even though it faces the wall and nobody will ever see it. You'll know it's there. So you're going to use a beautiful piece of wood on the back. For you to sleep well at night, the aesthetic and the quality has to be carried all the way through. So I just found it interesting that you feature this so prominently. I'm going to open by asking you why this ode to aesthetics appeals so much.
Right, yes. Well, Jobs, I think, is making a point about one's personal values and integrity. And the point is, if you are ambitious for your life, you want to accomplish something meaningful, significant, and then we start using all of these superlative value concepts, including beautiful. And the point that he is making is that for you, and this is the most important thing, for you in your life to assess that what you have accomplished is meaningful, significant, and beautiful, you have to know that everything that you did fits your highest value standards. And so what he's warning against is the easy way that people will often sell themselves out. And it's not primarily through what they do with respect to other people, but with respect to their own values. They cut corners in their own lives. They allow falsenesses and hypocrisies and little lies to get into their own lives. And they don't do as well as they know that they could. And then you're setting yourself up for a measure of disappointment and in some cases even guilt, right,
Right.
over your life. So the positive point is, and it's interesting because Jobs is a technology guy, and we have this stereotype of people who are engineers, that they're purely functionalist and they just want to get the job done and they don't think about style and beauty and aesthetics, right, and so forth. And the point is that really is wrong. It doesn't matter if you're an engineer or an artist or an athlete or a writer. Make it beautiful.
Yeah. It sounds a bit more like it's an ode to authenticity above anything else,
Exactly.
because
Yes.
aesthetics can, well, primarily, I mean, just the epistemology of the word, it is to beauty, to look at, rather than how that's been interpreted by you as a ode to almost authenticity. But yeah, Jobs, just as like a credibility factor for how inherent our sort of our appreciation of aesthetics is that within the technology realm, it was certainly not a consideration how this looks. It was all about how functional is it. We were looking for the absolute highest efficiency of the product. And then obviously Jobs sacrificed a lot of efficiencies for the aesthetics, and Apple is now the biggest company in the world. So there is something to be said about aesthetics has even in the technology realm, an extremely deep value.
Sure.
But could you comment?
We find this in pretty much all areas. You know, if you appreciate a building can be purely functional, but we all want homes, and we want to have our workplaces and even our larger urban environment to be both functional and beautiful, and to have those integrated.
I really have become recently thought a lot more about my physical environment in terms of just interior design, but also appreciating the external design. And you'll see I do have some questions on that as well later. But it's funny, you mentioned the architecture. I'm sitting here in a district in Stockholm called Södermalm, and it is just south of Gamla Stan, which is the old town of Stockholm. I'm sure you're familiar with Stockholm.
Yes.
Yeah. And the beautiful old European beauty, it sort of feeds back a little bit into Södermalm, which is the island just to the south of it. But then in the 70s and 80s, the government initiated the Million People Project, which was basically to build inhabitancy for 1 million people. And linked to like purely from a functional standpoint, what they did was they knocked down a lot of beautiful old colorful buildings with pointy roofs with little French terraces, because they weren't so functional. And they built, quite literally, I can see it out my window here, just cement blocks for streets and streets and blocks and blocks. And it is like, this is now an area that's purely offices, you know, like you want to come inside. The Scandinavians have a terrific interior design, so it's always nice to be inside. But like, when you're walking down the street, there is nothing that's drawing you to the park bench. Absolutely nothing. It's dreary. And you can imagine in the winter, it's even worse. But then you go through Gamla Stan, it could be cold as hell. You still want to sort of walk along the cobblestones and appreciate what's around you. I think that's
right. Exactly.
You know, that's really what I think about when it's, you know, when aesthetics is mentioned, like physical beauty.
That's right. Yeah.
So in your essay, furthermore, on sort of art, why art became ugly, you demonstrate quite a deeper than usual understanding and knowledge of art history. So I just thought to myself, do you produce any art yourself?
No, I'm not an artist. I'm an avid consumer of pretty much all media. So
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I did have many years of piano lessons when I was a kid, and played around with this, that, and the other thing, but not anything seriously.
I wonder, why do you?
For all of these things, if you're going to be very good, you have to put your time in on them, and so it's a time trade-off. You can only be very good at a few things at most in your life, so you have to call your shots.
Do you have to be good though to produce art?
No, not necessarily. If it's for personal pleasure, singing in the shower or singing in the car, or just, most of us still have a soundtrack going in the back of our head, and all of that's a great pleasure. And as you mentioned, interior design, making your personal space beautiful. Making up stories around the campfire with your friends and family. All of those are personalized art. And yes, we're not necessarily striving for world-class standards there.
Do you think it'll be something you approach later in life? You will take back up the piano, or maybe paint or something like this?
Well, yeah, I don't have any serious commitments. I think like many people, I have ideas for novels in the back of my head,
Okay.
and once in a while I do dust off my piano playing skills, and I do have a few other musical instruments around the house, and I pick them
Hmm.
up once in a while. But right now I'm looking at kind of still a lot of intellectual and other projects that I want to get done.
Nice.
So it's
Yeah.
not
No, I'm
serious.
I'm sure. So it's really just the time trade-off.
Oh yeah.
So you ask in the same essay, we're moving more towards the philosophy and postmodernism, but you ask in the same essay, why has art of the 20th century poured its creative energies and cleverness into the trivial and self-proclaimed
Hmm.
meaninglessness? And I just said, when everything's the same, nothing matters. So can you explain the inherent meaninglessness of postmodern art and maybe draw a line between the aesthetics of this and the culture?
Yeah, well, that's a great, yeah, complicated and absolutely important topic, right? Because certainly for most people over the course of the last century, who love culture, who love art, they're slapped in the face with what's been going on in the high modernist and now postmodernist art world. And it really does strike them as a slap in the face, both aesthetically, but then also that intellectual puzzlement that we all go through. It's like, what the hell is going on? And in many cases, they come with a benevolent naivete. I've been told that this is great, this is important, and so I really do want to understand. Maybe there's some deficiency in me. So we do give it a lot of a benefit of the doubt. I think to its credit, certainly modernism and postmodernism in the art world, they are sounding important themes.
Mm.
I think that's inherent in art. We want art to have just as we've been discussing, a sensuous impact on us, our eyes, our touch, our even
Hmm.
our sense of smell
There's emotional reaction.
and sound. That's right. But then also, instead of it simply being a sensuous appeal, we know that art can push our emotional buttons deeply, where we laugh out loud and we feel energized and need to get up and run around.
Mm.
And sometimes, we cry and we find ourselves sad
Hmm.
for a while, or even crushed emotionally by an experience. And we think about it, so what is being said there? What does this make me think of? And we do find ourselves, when we're in the presence of great art, thinking about all of the important things in our lives, our
Yeah.
important values, and so on. So, modernism and postmodernism, I do think, are continuous with that, but for various reasons, they are emphasizing the negative in all areas of life. Now, partly this, I think, is because postmodernism, sorry, not postmodernism, I want to save that one for a little bit, that the early modernists were part of the modern world. And what happened in the modern world was a big rise in our analytic attentiveness, scientific method. And one of the things that we start to do is break everything down to its constituent elements and then try to put it together again. And you do see this going on in 19th century art and art theory, where they're analyzing art. And they're saying all of the different elements of art, can we break it down to its constituent components and see what's going on there? So if you're talking about painting, you'll be talking about line and light and shadow and color and perspective and all of the elements.
Mm.
And just as scientists will break things down to its constituent parts to see how it all works, you can see the art theorists and the artists doing all of that. And so part of what happened was art went in a very reductionistic direction, almost as a kind of a scientific experiment. So I don't know, you might imagine the early brain scientists, they take off the top of someone's head and then they just, they poke here and say, all right, what happens if we poke this part of the brain? Or what happens if we take out this part of the brain? Can
Mm.
the person still think? And
Okay.
there's a similar, or feel, or sense. And there's a similar thing going on in the art world where we say, well, suppose we get rid of the third dimensional perspective and we just have arrays of colors and lines on a two-dimensional surface.
Hmm.
Is this still art? Or what if we get rid of the color differentiation? Is it still art? Right. And what if we get rid of any perceptual content and we just have an idea? Is it art? Can we get any sort of emotional reactions without really communicating any representational concept? Yes or no?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole reductionistic strain that's going on in art where they're just taking art apart and seeing what's left.
Okay.
And part of the ending nihilism does seem to be that they got, after a few decades of this, to the point where we kind of stripped everything away from art and we're not left with anything. So art comes to seem kind of empty.
Mm-hmm.
So that I think is one strain.
Mm.
But it looks like you need to say something, so
Well,
go ahead and jump in.
I wonder if it necessarily does have to be bad when you use the reductionist argument and just strip away elements of art, because theoretically, I'm not sure if there's great examples of it, but theoretically there still can be really good art produced that can produce an emotional reaction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure.
And like I said, I can't think of any examples, but
yeah,
perhaps, the question would be, like, with all the reductionists, why isn't art being produced from this reduction that does cause an emotional reaction? Like,
right. Yeah. Well, part of it is one of the experiments was to say that art traditionally has been evoking emotions, but let's try to strip away all of the emotions and just make everything very cool and valueless, and then see if it still is art. And at most, what you're then ending up with is either you just have some idea that you can kind of figure out what the idea is, but it's not meant to cause any emotional reaction in you, or you go the other way and you're just left with some colors that may or may not be pleasing to your eyes, but it doesn't evoke any deeper emotions, right, and so on. No, but you're right. Any of these scientific experiments, if we say that that's what's going on, they can be valuable. And I think part of artistic training throughout the centuries has been analytical, not as ruthlessly as was engaged in the modernistic project, but to say as part of your training, we do take art apart and you work on different elements and then you try the different combinations and so on. But what is different about the reductionist argument is that rather than say we're taking everything apart so that we can better understand how to put it together to have art that is integrated, that is a sensuous appeal, an emotional appeal, and an intellectual appeal, that, and this is where you have to start doing a little mind reading, where you're doing the reduction for analytical purposes, but you're not really that interested in putting things back together. So that nihilistic destructiveness starts to come out, where you just enjoy the breaking things down. Yes. Now, I think another absolutely important part of the art, though, is not at all kind of as an analytic experiment, but as a kind of strong pessimism. If we think you're an artist and you're attracted to art because you want to experience the world sensuously, strongly. You want to have strong emotional reactions. You want to really feel intellectually engaged, like you're figuring things out.
Yeah.
And so if that is the prototypical motivation, right, for someone to come to be an artist, the question then is going to be, what happens if you are a passionate and thoughtful person, but what you come to believe and feel is that the negative is the dominant and truest understanding of the world, and you want to express that in your art. So here I think the dates start to become important, because if you look at standard art history, and I think this is right, they'll say that the big break really is happening in art history around the turn of the 20th century.
By the big break, you mean move towards postmodern art?
Now, toward modernist art. Postmodernism is going to be a little bit later. So you say, there's all kinds of realism and impressionism and so forth that are dominant in the late 1800s. So Monet, Manet, and others. But the big breaks start to occur with someone like Edvard Munch in the late 1890s, and then early Braque and Picasso in the early part of the 20th century. So, and then Marcel Duchamp is a young man, and de Kooning is in that area, and so on. So if you just take that kind of generation immediately before World War I, that generation there, but then you ask what's going on in the world of ideas and culture at that time, and it's pretty dark stuff that's going on. I mean, you do have a large number of people who are impacted by, say, Darwin's Origin of Species, and so this idea that human beings just might be these instinctual animals, and right, and it's all nature read in tooth and claw. And Friedrich Nietzsche is, the leading philosopher that all of the exciting young people are reading, and he's telling us that God is dead, and we're in this era of nihilism, and all of these fairy tales are just myths, and we're surrounded by mediocrities, and we're in a slave culture, and so on. You've got scientists arguing that entropy and the second law of thermodynamics, and I'm not saying that these are all the right interpretations of all of these things, but you can say that entropy means that the universe is winding down toward a nothing, and it's just going to be this ultimate heat death of the universe. And you got Sigmund Freud coming along, saying that we're all just these smutty animals that want to rape and enslave each other and have sex with our mothers. And so forth. You got Marx talking about alienation and oppression and exploitation.
Painting quite the picture of a
exactly
depressed mood.
Right. But these are all the dominant mood. Yeah, these are the dominant culture. So if you're a sensitive, thoughtful, passionate person growing up in this time, and even if you're not like a PhD, history or philosophy type student, you're just a very sensitive, intellectual person, and you're attracted to the arts, you're going to soak it all up.
Yeah.
And that's what artists do. You soak it all up, and then you run it through your personal filters, and then you want to externalize it. So then the question is going to be, are we going to be, doing pretty Monet light studies about these benevolent gardens, and life is kind of this lovely garden, right? Or are we going to be talking about building, magnificent cathedrals to the sky that better enable us, say, to point toward the heavens and perhaps even toward God?
Like big shift away from religious themes, for sure.
That's right. So all of that's going to seem like crap. All of that's going to seem pointless. So if you really feel that life is nasty, it's brutal, it's irrational, that we're all in conflict with each other, and we're just killing, and we're all just going to be dead in a box in the ground.
Nothing matters.
Well, nothing matters ultimately. And then how do you express that in your art?
Sure.
And you're not going to have beautiful colors. You're not going to be, you're going to be looking for the most disturbing emotions that you can point to. Right? And the themes, to the extent that you have themes, have to be ones that people get people to feel confused, to feel alienated, and to think that this is really pointless as an exercise. So that break, I think, explains a lot of the content direction of early modernism.
I just love, I hate to interject, but I just love that analysis of how art literally can reflect culture and the mood. That's such a tangible way of looking. I'm thinking of Munch's Scream, I'm thinking of Picasso paintings, Dali paintings. Like, it is fantastic, but it's what the hell's going on,
That's right. And these guys are extraordinarily creative at externalizing what's going on in there. So you go into Dali's world, and it is surreal in the sense of it's just amazing. Weird, freaky dreams, and you have no idea what weird, freaky dreams, and maybe reality just is one big weird, freaky dream. And you look at Picasso, and you go into Picasso, and it's all of these empty eyes, and there's no glimmer of intelligence in all of those, and they're all fractured, and that's right. So you feel it, and you think
details are taken away, like you're just
a lot of that.
You're a box. Yeah.
Did
you want to make a point quickly moving over to the postmodern?
Yes. My reading is that a lot of these modernist themes, and there's lots of substrains that we can get into, are working themselves out. Obviously, the art world was largely interrupted by World War I, took a hit during the Depression, World War II, but you do see a lot of variations going on in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And so on. Also, interestingly, there's a strange detour by much of the Western art community toward a kind of social realism and socialist realism. As then they stopped being quite so contentless and nihilistic, and they got captured by the idea that what was going on in the Soviet Union was this great experiment in socialism, and so we do need to give artistic props to that. And so you're doing a lot more realistic kind of art, but trying to prop up the values of a kind of some sort of left-leaning atmosphere as well. But then that got abandoned by the time we get to the 50s. So what happens though by the time we get to postmodernism is, I think, a little bit more ruthless, because the modernists, when you push them, they will say things like, I am saying stuff about reality.
Mm-hmm.
I am saying something about the human condition, that this is what it's like to be a human being in this alienated world. And I am saying things like, man is a wolf to man, and there is all of this exploitation. So we still have some values, even if they are negative values, and we still have some commentary on the nature of reality and the nature of human beings.
Mm.
But what if you start to become very skeptical that we can even make statements about what reality is, or that there is such a thing as human nature and the human condition, or that there really are objective values that we think are being violated, and you're angry about that and you want to say something about that? If you're very skeptical and very relativistic, you're going to start backing away from all of that. And that's what starts to happen in the 1950s and the 1960s, where we say, we have no idea what reality is like. All we have is these subjective narratives that each of us constructs, or that is constructed in us by various social forces that are operating on us. And we're all just vehicles through which we are channeling various kinds of social energy. And there are no universal values. There are no objective values. So if I'm an artist then, and I believe all of that, then what am I going to do? And at that point, you can't be making statements about reality, about the human condition, or about objective values. It has to be just some sort of subjective or group subjective kind of content. So what typically the postmoderns do on the content side is they will then start to say, the only kind of reality that we can talk about is social reality, not nature, not God, right, and so forth. And we're never going to make claims, sorry?
Because everything's contextual.
Well, even more than contextual, it's socially constructed contextual.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's I can be contextual and say, here's my context. I'm in this room, and the room is a real place, and there's a painting behind me, and it's a real painting, and I'm real, and my computer is real, and you're real. But this is our little intellectual context right now.
Right.
But if I want to be a social constructionist, I want to argue that none of those things have an independent objective existence apart from what we make of it socially. So we start only doing social commentary. We don't talk about God, nature, human nature, and so forth. But we always do it from a social group perspective. So I'm not speaking as a human being or expecting to communicate to you as a human being. If I'm an artist, then I have to be a white guy, right? Or an Anglo-Saxon white guy making an Anglo-Saxon white guy comment about something. So what you do find, and this is a part of the distinctive move into postmodernism, is that all of the artists are no longer artists. They are always a hyphenated artist. I'm a woman artist. Right. I'm a gay artist. I am a Hispanic, right? Jewish, right? Whatever.
Yeah, and that's my value.
And that's right.
Yep.
And all of it is that social narrowness, and that's all that I can say. And then part of it also is to say, if you're not in my group, I can't talk to you, and you will not understand my art because you have a different social reality that has been constructed in you. So you start to then have, well, this would be the pejorative term, a ghettoization of art.
Okay.
And then, of course, if you think that there still is a kind of exploitation that's going on, the art is going to be very angry. It's my group against your group. And so you have all kinds of protest art. And then, politics, I think, does have a legitimate place in art. But, that's all you're left with is social realities. It's adversarial, and you're just making political comments. And so postmodernism starts to work that territory.
Perhaps what they end up producing is only, going back to the reductionist argument, what they end up producing is only what is within their socially contextualized range of possibility, because they couldn't borrow other people's socially contextualized ranges to put into their art as well. And therefore, the potential of the art is just immediately handicapped because it can't enter all these other ranges,
that's right.
like that. Well, saying, I did have a question, perhaps this one is better, saying that Dali and Picasso represented their age. When you have a urinal being placed as an art exhibition, what does that say about this age?
Yeah. Yeah, I want to weaken your claim just a little bit. In part, they are representing their age, but I think they are representing some currents within their age. I don't want to say that they're speaking for the whole of the early 20th century, because there's all sorts of amazing stuff that's going on right in the 20th century. I mean, we have, by the end of the 19th century, we've largely eliminated slavery in the civilized parts of the world and are working on the other parts. And that's a great moral accomplishment. Women who have been forever second and third class citizens are now going to higher education and voting universally and starting business. So that's an amazing progress story. Yeah, there is the brutality of communism and Nazism when we're fighting the wars. But the democratic republics, the liberal societies, they do get their act together and they do win those wars, and they are creating still a lot of free space. And of course, there's all the stuff that's going on in technology, the radio, television, everybody being able to get a car and so forth. So I don't want to say that these surrealists and fragmenting the universe into cubism, they're speaking for their age. They're speaking for a part of their age and so on. Okay, so with that comment said, the other thing is that they're not only representing their age, but they're also making their age. So, and this is part of what people who are at the forefront of culture do. Okay. That not in all cases, but in many cases, it really is a few elite individuals, right, within various movements who have a creative originality and a force of personality and perhaps some marketing savvy, who they take culture in a certain direction, and the rest of us follow along. So they're representing part of culture, but they're also making culture and taking it in a direction that it didn't necessarily have to go. So, but that's just all by way of preamble for the urinal. But let me we'll remember the urinal, but jump in. Go ahead.
No. Please continue. What I was going to say was going to take us away from the urinal.
Okay.
Which
so yeah, Duchamp. He's a brilliant guy. He was a chess master, and what's going on in his art is he's enjoying playing intellectual games with us. But he is going in the direction of being able to see 2 or 3 steps ahead of everyone else, as a great chess player does, and see where the trend lines in art are going, and then finding a clever way to say, where we are now, if we go further down this road, this is where we're going to end up. We're going to end up with the urinal. So, and it is kind of interesting that, a century later, when I think it was the BBC, they polled something like 1,000 working artists, and said,
century later being what year?
This is in the early 2000s now.
Okay.
So it's about a decade ago. So they're doing one of those retrospectives on the 20th century, and the question they're asking is, over the course of the last 100 years, who do you think was the most important artist and the most influential on your own approach to art? And Picasso was number 2 on the survey list. Duchamp was number 1.
He's number 1. Wow.
He was number 1. And that's interesting because urinal was displayed. His label for it was fountain, but it was displayed in 1917. So that then is to say, a century later, he is still the dominant person. And he's a kind of conceptualist. And so what we then have to do is we have to see this object as a symbol for certain abstract ideas that Dali wants to communicate. So I'll say a few things about it. I mean, one is to say, you think of an artist, and what's your stereotype of what an artist? And you say, well, an artist is someone who creates something himself or herself, and then goes ahead and makes it. Well, if we're playing this reductionist game and we're going after creating and originality and making, on the artist side, and we strip all of that away, then what are you left with? Well, you don't have an artist as a maker. Duchamp didn't make it. Instead, all he did was he went down to a plumbing store and bought it. Somebody else made it.
Yeah.
That's a mass-produced thing.
It was the mass-produced, yeah.
Yeah, so his entire contribution to the process is laying out some money for it and then transporting it to a place and saying, let's call this art. So that then is to say something very negative about the artist. The artist is not this creator, innovator, maker person.
True.
Okay, right. We also, when we think about art, if we think about the products of art, we typically treat them with a certain amount of reverence. Right? When we clean them, we're very careful. Right? Sometimes we put them behind protective screens. We shield them from the light.
They occupy prominent places within.
Yes, that's right. And we'll put them in museums or art galleries with security. And in many cases, they will say that they now have some intrinsic value and worth. And in many cases, we're making them with special art products and media. Marble, the best, most purest marble from Carrara, Italy, right, and so forth. So if we then say that, say a statue by Michelangelo made with Carrara marble, and the enormous intrinsic as well as artistic and symbolic and cultural value that it has, well, now we juxtapose that with the urinal. And what is the urinal, right? Well, it's perhaps some clay and ceramic, some porcelain, cheap materials, just kind of mass produced in some factory in New Jersey, and bopped around and
making it.
Sorry?
No technical skill goes into creating it.
Well, there is actually quite a bit of technical skill, but at a certain point, it's all automated.
Not compared to Michelangelo.
Yeah, more or less, robotically made.
Yeah.
So this is not Carrara marble, right? It's clay and some porcelain. It's not an individually unique thing. It's just this mass-produced. There's thousands and thousands of them, right, all around the world. And so, are art objects special, unique? And the answer here again is a negative one. No, it's not. Nothing special. And then if you go from the artist to the artistic product to the other key part of the art, and that's the consumer of the art, or the person who experiences the art. And then our expectations are that when we are in front of a work of art, or it's surrounding us, that we're going to have a certain sensuous, emotional, intellectual experience. And if we are hopeful about art, we want it to be a positive one. We want us to make it feel, we're glad that we're in the world and happy to be alive and maybe energized to do various things, to love our friends and family a little more and be more, right, and so forth. So, but what then is the experience you have when you are confronted with the urinal?
Right.
So you go in and you look at it and you recognize it. That's a urinal. And what's a urinal for? And we say things like
the antithesis of beauty and art and happiness.
Exactly, that's right. So this is something that men urinate on. Now, if that's art and you're choosing something that men urinate on as your artwork, then what are you saying about art? You're saying
it's the absolute bottom. Absolutely anything can be art.
That's right. Well, it's partly that, but this is not, this is not just anything, even though, I mean, when sort of buy something, he could have bought a kitchen sink, right? And said, here's my work of art, a kitchen sink, right?
Sure.
He chose a urinal, right? And so if a urinal is art and urinals are things that you piss on, then what he is saying is piss on art. And that's his intellectual theme, right? And that's where we're going, right? If everything is negative, then we're not creating beautiful, ennobling things. And you get to the point when, if you think about yourself as a nihilist, there are burn it down nihilists, but there are also nihilists who just want to shit on everything, and nihilists who just want to piss on everything.
Sure.
And what we have here exactly is a thematic statement by the most influential artist of the 20th century, exactly that.
Wow, yeah. Just to move away from art, a little bit of a sidetrack, but I will ask, so a major theme of postmodernism is explaining truths as subjective matters only explicable through social context. So I just want to ask you, are there such things as objective truths? And then if so, which of them do you believe in that have been made subjective through postmodernism?
Mm. Yeah, I think there's lots of objective truth, and those who make the subjective turn, as the postmoderns are at the end of that road, they buy into various sorts of skeptical arguments. And the reason for that is that human cognition is an extraordinarily complicated and delicate process, and it is subject to error. And I think we still are in the early stages of human psychology being a science, neuroscience being a science. And so we have this extraordinarily complicated territory with lots of theories and hypotheses.
Yeah, we know absolutely nothing about consciousness.
Well, we do know, I think we know a lot about consciousness, but we know a lot about it in the sense that we are in the early stages of a science. So we don't have a full theory.
Do we know it? Yeah, like.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what's often easy to do in that state is to say, well, here's a hypothesis about how perception works, or how logic gets off the ground, or what concept formation is, or what semantics is. And the early theories are always going to have problems in them. And so, if you're a smart person, you can find the problems. And that's exactly what intellectuals should be doing, is trying to find the problems. But if you do enough of that, then at a certain point, you just want to give up and say, this is too hard, or I think this is an impossible project, and you become a skeptic of a certain sort. And if you become a skeptic of a certain sort, then you're going to start saying, well, objectivity is a myth, truth is some sort of a myth, and you're just going to talk about what we're doing in our heads and in our language in a very different fashion. Now that, I think, is the kind of the gentle understanding of objectivity. But what objectivity is to say that our consciousness, right, or our minds, I'm just going to use those as synonymous right now, is a response mechanism to reality. So we are physical organisms with a very complicated brain and on my view, an emergent consciousness. And when it interacts with its environment, there's energy exchange that goes on, and our brains and consciousness gets into certain states.
Okay.
All right. So, but what is interesting about human consciousness is that we do have what we call our higher cognitive faculties, our ability to think abstractly and to think in general terms about things. And that's one of the big issues in psychology and epistemology, how it is that we do that. So, I can see you as a distinct, unique human being with all of your particularities. And I can now, since I'm right beside you, look at myself and see myself as a human being with my unique particular. So we are two individuals, right? And we are different in all sorts of dimensions. But at the same time, I can say man and I can say man. And so I've got this abstract category of man, and I place you in that. And that abstract category does not have any particular dimensions. It doesn't say that, to be a man, your hair has to be a certain length, or your skin has to be a certain tone, or your voice has to have a certain timbre. So we abstract away from all of those particular measurements and have a generalized concept, as we call it. Now, how we do that, we're still working out how that goes on. And there's some interesting theories, right, that are going on. But all of it, right, is very complicated. And so what we're trying to do is come up with theories of perception. How do our senses work as response mechanisms to the environment? How do we form these abstract concepts? How do we then start putting abstract concepts into these more complicated units that we call propositions, right, and sentences? And how do we take all of those sentences and then put them into narratives that we start to, say, here's a story. How do we put them into theories, which might be networks of 50 or 100 different propositions? And the more abstract and broader our thinking becomes, the more difficult it is to maintain that connection to our original contact with reality. For us, it's a fallible process. We have to direct the process of our minds, and we can ignore data, we can misinterpret data, we can engage in wishful thinking, we can get tired and sloppy. So since it is a fallible process, we have to work out what the norms are for using this very powerful tool that we have according to the norms, so that as things get more complicated, we retain the commitment. So objectivity, though, is a commitment to engaging in that process, to recognizing that I am, for example, tired and I'm working on some difficult problem, that rather than just letting my mind slip and go for an easy answer, to say, I am committed to giving some additional attention, in this case, to try to attend to everything that I need to attend to. And that's one kind of objectivity. Or if I have a hypothesis and I kind of like that hypothesis, so maybe I made it up and I want this hypothesis to be true, but then I'm having a conversation with you and you're making some points that seem to be critical of my hypothesis. And I kind of recognize that this point you're making is a threat.
Sure.
Well, I can block that out. That's within the powers that I have. But I also know that I've got this kind of meta principle in my mind that if I really am interested in the truth, then I have to pay attention to the criticisms as well. So I can override my emotional desire to shut down what you are saying and attend to your criticism and ask, maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe I need to adjust my thinking. Now I can do that or not do that. That's up to my
if you
my
don't do that,
control.
that makes my truth subjective and then your own subjective, because it's no longer taking into account the fact that there are competing opinions to find the objectivity.
Right. So yes, so if I then say, I'm just going to believe this hypothesis because it's my hypothesis and I want it to be true, well, then I am becoming subjective in the literal sense, that I'm saying, I want the truth to be dependent on what I want, right, on what I made up, rather than the facts of the matter, and that you might be pointing out a fact of the matter that I need to attend to. So yeah, subjectivity is possible to us. And so objectivity, though, also is possible to us, because we do know lots of people will, when they're tired, makes the extra effort. And we also do know that people, when they are being criticized, they will pay attention to the criticism. They will incorporate that into their thinking. They might change their mind in the course of thinking. So I think objectivity is possible. And actually, I think, to the extent that you are able to live in the world, you have to be objective. I mean, you have to recognize that it's below freezing outside and I'm going to be outside for an hour, so I need to put my jacket on, right? Or the red light is red, and so forth. Or I really am hungry and there are certain things that objectively will satisfy my nutritional needs and other things won't do that and are poisons. So I think objectivity is all around.
Those sort of like physical objectivities, though, people are naturally going to respond to. I'm more asking like cultural truths, if that is such a thing,
So the point then is to start with the easier cases of objectivity, and then it just becomes more complicated. I mean, reality is kind of complicated, and then part of that reality is other people, and of course other people are complicated in all sorts of ways, and so on. And so what does it require to maintain objectivity in a social context? So I don't know, so one social reality we can talk about is, two people meet each other and they're attracted to each other and they fall in love, and maybe they become committed to each other. Right, now that's a social reality, and we can say it's a social reality because they are making the relationship. It's to them is doing something. So it's not like the relationship is just out there and the relationship grabs them and does something to them. The one person is a certain way, the other person is a certain way. They recognize those things about each other, and then the relationship emerges out of what they do,
created by them.
So yes, so that's right. So it is a social construction that we are talking about in that sense, a relationship, or a romantic relationship. Now, I would say, objectivity is absolutely important in this context here, and this is what we're doing when we are initially meeting people. We're trying to get real information about the person, and we listen to what the person says, and we learn various things about them. But before we get to know the person well, we're always, our bullshit detector is operating.
Certainly.
Is this person telling me the truth, or is this person not telling me the truth? And if I get the sense that this person is not completely honest, then objectively, it becomes very difficult for me to be attracted to this person.
Sure.
And one of the things that is extraordinarily attractive in these relationships is when people realize that they really are objectively sharing certain values, and that they really can trust this person. And so then you're in a position to share very important things about yourself with that person, and to learn very important things, right, about that person.
Yeah.
So, that is a social construct. It's a social relationship, but objectivity is absolutely critical to the process. And then if you think about it going the other way, and you ask, why is it that people fall out of love? So if two people are desperately attracted to each other, and then we fast forward a year later and they hate each other. Well, what's happened?
Well,
why did that happen?
Sure.
Well, because you learned some objective facts about the other person.
Sure.
Right? There were some realities that you were unaware of, and
Yeah.
suddenly you're slapped in the face with those. Now, we also know that there is a subjective temptation in that context, right? So I don't know, suppose I'm involved with a woman and I get evidence or some suggestion that maybe she's cheating on me. Well, what I can do is I can say, I don't want to think that she's cheating on me.
Yeah.
Right? And I can just shut that down, right? Or you're my friend and you come to me and say, I've got on my phone some pictures of your girlfriend, and here she's doing something with this other guy. And I say, I hate you, right? How dare you slander, right? So what I'm clearly doing is acting subjectivistically in that case to try to deny the evidence. But to the extent that I'm objective, I would say, oh, that's a fact. That's an uncomfortable fact. I hate it. I'm going to go through emotional hell for a little while. But the important thing here is, if I'm going to have a long-term relationship, it has to be based on reality, right? And an objective sharing of values between people. And if this really is a person who is a cheater, I can't have that. So I have to fall out of love with that person.
Yeah.
So now that's in one way, simple case, because it's only involving two people, but it is at the same time a complicated case, because then you start adding a third person, a fourth person. Now you're talking about a family, you're talking about a political unit, you're talking about a whole team. The social construction does get a lot more complicated, and maintaining objectivity does become more complicated. But I don't want to go down the road at all of the skeptics that just say, oh, it's too complicated, or as a matter of philosophical principle, we can't do objectivity at all, so we're not going to try.
Yeah. So there's so much I want to ask you, Stephen. We haven't even touched on Nietzsche.
Right.
We haven't even touched on Nietzsche, which is really obviously a big mutual interest that we have.
Yeah.
And I also have a lot more questions on
maybe in
postmodernism.
6 months or so, we should have another conversation, part 2.
That would be a dream. But look, before we move on, let's to Nietzsche. Let me just finally, again, speaking of postmodernism, speaking of objective truths, subjective truths, a lot of social movements currently which prescribe to certain Marxist ideologies, or just are the victims of a lot of postmodern education. So I'm thinking of Black Lives Matter, and you might have seen that one of the founders, Patrisse Cullors, she recently distanced herself from the group and admitted that the group is shaped on a Marxist-Lenin ideology. So I wanted to ask you if you could explain to us what the line is between BLM and Marxism, because it's not so obvious, I think, generally to people, but there is quite a sort of maniacal implication from the fact that they are linked.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a very complicated question. Yeah. Marxism and its relationship to postmodernism is one set of issues. And on some issues, the Marxists and the postmodernists are opposed to each other. So the Marxists are metaphysical realists. They believe that there is a reality, it's material, it goes through various causal processes, and we can figure out what those are and make predictions about the direction of society. Whereas the postmoderns are skeptical, we can't know reality. We are anti-realist. There is no such thing as objective causality. Society and its dynamical movements are ultimately unpredictable and just a matter of chaos. But what they do share is in part a genealogical connection, because the postmodernism in the first generation was largely populated by people who were Marxists who lost their faith, or close fellow travelers at the far end of the left who also lost their faith as well. But the similarities, though, are at the value levels, in that the Marxist concepts of exploitation and alienation and the necessity for violent social movements to move things in the direction that you want to go, both the Marxists and the postmoderns share those social and value frameworks. And that is what puts both of them against liberal democratic republicanism, that wants to talk about individuals who are rational, and we should be, through civil discourse and voluntary interactions, moving society in the direction that we want to go. Now, Black Lives Matter, I think, is just a splinter group, right, within that broader mix. There are hardcore Marxists, right, who will then say what we need to do as a matter of real strategy is target various groups. So we will not talk about the alienated and exploited proletariat only in economic terms. We'll also argue that there's an alienated and exploited gender groups. And so there will be sexualized strategic versions of Marxism. And again, the idea is that you're still doing that as a strategy, and ultimately a violent strategy, to overthrow the liberal democratic West.
And that can extrapolate out to just any sort of social group. In this case, the Black social group, or the...
That's right. So you'll have economic groups, you'll have sex and gender groups, you'll have racial groups, you'll have ethnic groups, you'll use religious groups. So we will use...
interest groups even.
That's right. That's right. And environmentalism, we will say, it's human beings who are alienated from the planet and they are exploiting the earth, and it's a violence, and so we need to do the same sort of thing. So at that level, some portions of the Black Lives Movement is explicitly just a more specific strategy within a broader Marxist framework. And some of the BLM founders will explicitly say, yes, we are Marxists working this particular territory.
And no, go on.
Some of them, though, are I think more postmodern. They're not going to be making any claims about objective truths or the necessary way that reality has to go. For them perspective, it's going to be that I just happen to be born into a certain racial group, and it just is a happenstance, given the histories of the cultures that I am coming in, that there's conflicts between these racial groups. And I'm not saying that my group is any better than others. It just happens to be the group that I am a part of, and I want to advance its values by any means, fair and foul. And so I'm just going to be a kind of an applied postmodern activist on behalf of my group, and I'm not going to buy into the Marxist superstructure. And I think that's what's going on at the strategic and activist level. But I do think also there is another kind of BLM person, and whether these people are just used pawns or whether they are a legitimate part of the movement, is people who say we do really believe that there are injustices against Black minorities in the United States or in the Western world. Those really are injustices. We really do believe that equality and respect for rights are universal principles. And we just think that this minority group has been excluded from them to a certain extent. And what we want to do is be included. Right? So Black Lives Matter, in the most benevolent interpretation, I think that most people are initially attracted to, is to say Black Lives Matter also. Right? So let's not forget Black lives, and let's bring them fully into the equal rights respected community.
Which in any Western society is inherently known. It is.
It's non-controversial.
Yeah, it shouldn't be controversial or even subject to question.
Right. That's right.
Someone should raise their eyebrows if it was suggested that that wasn't already known, for instance.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And I think that's a measure of the actual great progress that we have made in the modern world, where we went from just a few centuries ago to basically everybody having racial prejudice, right, and ethnic prejudice and so forth. It kind of is an unquestioned part of their working cultural, to now the vast majority of people having the unquestioned, well, of course, right, racism is stupid and immoral.
So Steve, it's 6, you've got a bit more time. You've got.
Let's go for it. Yeah, we're having fun. So let's.
All right, brilliant, mate. So let's look at this. I noticed that on your bio, between 1st grade and 13th grade, you attended 6 different schools. So yeah, it's quite a lot of moving around early on in you know, as you're sort of becoming a man. And then straight after school, you went and worked on an oil rig in the Canadian wilderness. So I wanted to ask what impact this had in taking up your interest in arts and philosophy, if any.
Yeah. Well, yeah, clearly they were formative on me, right, as I grew to an adult human being. So I did have some varied experience, right? There was a certain amount of moving around. Yes. And then after I graduated from high school, I kind of knew I was going to go to university.
Yeah.
I did want to take at least a year off and travel and kind of work my way around as I was traveling around. So yes, I did end up working on oil rigs for quite a while in the Canadian West and Northwest. I did work in an iron foundry. That was also in a very interesting experience.
Okay. Do you want to expand on that? Why?
Well, yeah. So they were both hard work.
Sure.
They were both also high tech for the times, and so I got a really nice sense for where oil actually comes from and what it takes for us to do so. I learned about all the equipment and then the logistics networks and a little bit about refineries. And so, and then when I was working in an iron foundry for a while, in both cases, I started from entry-level positions, but moved a couple of rungs up the ladder. But it was very informative about, yes, where iron comes from, how careful you need to be. You can die in an iron foundry, you can die working on an oil rig.
Sure.
And great respect then for the technological accomplishments that enable us to do what we do.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I was also really proud because I was making very good money.
Okay. That's nice.
And so I was able to, do all of those, late teenage boy dreams of, travel around and buy a motorcycle and
brilliant.
That fun stuff. And then I did end up saving enough money to be able to pay for pretty much all of my university education.
Yeah. Where you took a Bachelor of Arts and then a Master's of Arts.
Yes. Right. So to answer your first question, I do think, the range of the experiences, both geographically, but then also the kinds of experiences, meant that I wasn't just like living in a little suburban bubble, or I was just only a farm kid who only knew that, or only a city kid who knew, how to.
So you sort of had like an idea that you were going to go to university.
Yes.
For the later years.
Now, at that point, though, I really was thinking I was going to be an engineer/architect.
Okay.
Because my dad had been a serial entrepreneur with lots of interests in real estate and taking kind of older buildings that nonetheless had some architectural merit and then reconditioning them.
Right.
So from an early age, I was working in the building trades and seeing my dad do business. So I was inspired to go in the direction of engineering and architecture. So I got the bachelor's and master's degrees primarily because I didn't want to have only a technical education.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't only want it to be, mechanics and math and physics and so on.
Yeah.
And I always had been a reader of books, and I get that from my parents and loving fiction and history and so on. But I knew there was a huge world out there, so I wanted to go and get kind of a standard liberal arts education and take a variety of courses. And the way I was thinking of it at the time was, during that 3 or 4 years of university, I would just build up my lifetime reading list. So I would know all of the books that I needed to go back to, and I would have a a structure. So
Mhm.
the problem though was that I ended up getting seduced by philosophy
Yeah.
during my university years. And
No more
then,
technical work after that, it looks like.
right, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Do you feel any sort of like melancholic irony that the very degree you worked so hard to complete yourself in the bachelor and masters has now become sort of the most stereotypical repository of the postmodern education, being the arts degree?
Yeah, kind of is my professional pride bruised by the fact that all of the arguments that the more nihilistic and destructive applications of postmodern as were developed by my field. Well,
Yeah,
yes and no.
that's one way to put it. But you know what I mean. Like,
I mean, I don't take any personal blame for it, but no, I do think that's the nature of philosophy. Philosophy, we are thinking about the most fundamental issues about, you know, who we are, what we take reality to be, you know, our cognitive relationship to it, and then by extension to other people and what principles. So yeah, philosophy for good or for bad really is fundamental and important.
Yep.
And over the course of philosophy's history, which is now, you know, several thousand years old, it does seem to go in cycles, and there's not any necessary cycles where it goes through more optimistic phases. And I do think philosophy has been very progressive in some eras. But then typically what happens is, you know, philosophy again is very complicated. Almost all of the historical theories have some flaws in them, sometimes gaping flaws. And so the next generation of philosophers, being very smart, they find those flaws and they exploit them, and they blow up the theory.
Yep.
And then philosophy ends up being in a very skeptical phase. So philosophers were doing what philosophers were supposed to do. And it's just the case that in the middle part of the 20th century, when postmodernism was being born, philosophy was in a very skeptical phase.
Yep.
And so its brilliant first generation, you know, came up with very sophisticated packages of those skeptical arguments, and then operationalized them, and in some cases strategized them, and in some cases militarized them. And now we have the activists in the street who want to blow it up.
Yeah. What would you say? Oh no, please continue.
Yeah, so I was just going to say then, you know, rather than blame storming philosophy all the way down and throwing our hands up, I would just say, well, what we need then is better philosophy. You know, if philosophy got us into this mess, philosophy is what's going to get us out of this mess. And it's inescapable because we are human beings. We are smart, and we are potentially brilliant. And we have in fact figured out a huge amount of stuff about the world. We live in this magnificent scientific and technological civilization, and
Life's
the vast
amazing.
majority of us do take human liberty and equality and then kind of this passion for life seriously. And that's an enormous philosophical achievement. So the battle is on, but it is largely a philosophical battle.
Sure. I mean, if it is a philosophical battle, though, what would you say to an undergrad who was studying an arts degree and perhaps felt like they were being taught through the lens of postmodernism rather than a free, open discussion? Like I remember you said in one of your interviews, you shouldn't know what your lecturer's politics are. And you yourself take pride in the fact that your students typically don't know what your politics are.
Yeah. Yes. But on that latter point, I do hold to that in the first couple of years of courses that students take with me. I make a point of not letting them know what my political views or my religious views are, because they need to get up to speed on what the arguments are. So yeah, my syllabi are all posted publicly at my website. And so you know, we're reading people all over the philosophical map. And on all of those issues, we're looking at the arguments on both or all sides of the debate. So I think until students know what the issues are and what the arguments are, it's inappropriate for the professor to say, and here's what the right answer is. I have no problem with professors saying, and here's what I think what the right answers are, once that professor has established a track record as being a genuine teacher, and say, now that you know what the arguments are, here's what I think. And it's going to be very clear. You also, part of your reputation is that you are a just person. And if the person, your student, is making an articulate argument for a position and reaching conclusions that you, the professor, disagree with, you're going to give the person full credit for the quality of their essay. And going back to our earlier discussion of objectivity, that's not that hard to do as a professor. You
Sure.
start reading the first page, and most professors will tell you they can read the first half page of an essay and tell you if it's an A, B, C, or D paper. That's just part of standard, right, professional
It's a
training.
question of intellectual honesty there.
Exactly. And so I do think the vast majority of those professors who downgrade students, they are being professionally dishonest, and they are sabotaging the process of education. So what I would say to any student who finds himself or herself in that situation, and usually we, even if we are freshmen or first year students, we're able to recognize, because we know we're dealing with complicated issues. We know that there's diversity of opinion out there. And if the textbook and the professor are only making one sustained argument and dismissing other arguments or not even paying attention to that, we all know this as freshmen. So then all I would say is, if it's a matter of an individual professor at your college or university, well, don't take courses with that person anymore. Find other professors. I would recommend that you plug into the student grapevine, talk to the students who are a little further along to find which professors are genuinely liberal educating at your institution. As it increasingly is happening, if your entire department is politicized, then I would say either shift to another department, major in something else, or go to a different university. In the United States alone, we have hundreds and hundreds of universities, and there's still lots of good ones that are actually doing liberal arts education. And then, of course, this generation, fortunately, there is the internet, and you can find, well, as we know, everything you want on the internet. So, any important issue that you find yourself thinking about, your professor, listen to your professor, listen to the argument, listen to the analysis, make sure you understand it, but go then out of your way to find what the competing positions are on the internet, and you will be able to find intelligent people making that case. That's that's self-education in the best sense. So I would say, in effect, be like Socrates, the way he was back before there were formal colleges and universities. When he was a young man, he went out of his way to say, well, who are the people who have the best reputations in all of these fields? I'm going to go hang out with them and try to have conversations with them and see what I can learn from them. But of course, with the confidence that finally I'm going to make up my own best judgment.
Totally.
I think that is a deep point, that all education ultimately is self-education. Of course, our adversaries on the indoctrinating left, and also there are indoctrinators on the right. We can't forget about them as well.
100% there are, and I would almost argue like more, like just less attractive, like mean-spirited, almost cruel. I think the right can be you talk about indoctrination from the left and right, certainly happens on both sides. You hear more about on the left, but I think the right indoctrination, there is an element of cruelty to it that doesn't necessarily exist on the left. I wonder if you think that's an accurate assessment or not.
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say what's common to both of those, I'll come right back to your question though, is that if we say that all education is self-education, something that you need to take self-responsibility for, the reason why indoctrinators end up being undoctrinators is that they fundamentally do not believe in selves, and they don't believe in self-regulation and self-control.
Self-agency,
that's right. And so they do just want to condition. And they want you just to be an avatar for an ideology or for a certain group's set of values. Now, but that's an interesting question though that you're raising about whether the viciousness that comes from segments of the left
I can explain how I came
vicious
to that.
than the viciousness that can come from the left, because they are both viciousnesses and
but perhaps let me qualify why I said it.
Okay. So I'm trying to think about examples.
Yeah, and it's just something that my girlfriend and I were talking about last night in preparation of speaking to you. So on the left, you can be indoctrinated heavy into Marxism, say, and at the very root of that, if it's carried out, it's as cruel as any other ideology you can find, because now everyone's equal, and anyone who tries to stand out or do something different is now totally on the outside, and that iterates out to them dying. But it starts from a place of compassion to a degree. You know, that's typically why young people are more compassionate, and then older people get more conservative. It starts off with compassion, like, I want everyone to be equal. I want everyone to have opportunity. I want everyone to be happy. I want no one to be poor, and so forth, you know, and then that's how you sort of get into it. And then it can go certain ways, which 100% are just as cruel as the right, but entering it is less cruel. Whereas on the right, from what I've seen and experienced, it can be like, you come at it from the place of, no, there's, I think, a heavier hand of racism dealt from the right indoctrination. Okay. Like, you don't like, you're now a part of this certain ideology because you think that this is better than that. And therefore, and do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes,
And then it can like iterate out that way. And therefore, you talk about left and right indoctrination. I just think that there is less of it on the right than there's far more of it on the left. But there is just something about from the right. It has a cruelty to it, which I think just makes it so unattractive and gives a lot of ammunition to the left. You know, if it is an ideological battle, you know, because typically the right, the more conservative values should just be love yours, love your own, and please try and allow freedom for as many people as possible. You know, like
kind of a nice conservatism.
Yes, exactly. But even that nice conservatism now is getting shit on by the left, because I think it gets wrapped up in this really ugly conservatism. Do you know what I'm trying to say? I'm sorry I'm not as articulate.
So what we're going from is kind of very general sets of ideological principles, and then using broad labels like right and left, which are already very big tent labels and including lots of sub-movements.
Yeah, I've heard you say you don't even believe in right and left anymore. There's no
well, yeah, that's true, and then maybe that can be for our next conversation, conversation as well. But I do think there's a symmetry initially. I think there are. I did a podcast on this late last year where I teased out kind of 8 major strands of leftism that I think are dominating right now. And some of the paths to leftism are more benevolent and some of them are more malevolent. And I think there's a similar thing on the right, again, using that label journalistically right now. There are more benevolent and less benevolent versions of right. So just to counterpoise, I think there are people on the right, say the religious right, and what they initially are, they come to it, they were nice Sunday school going kids, and we should all be about community and looking after each other and sharing and trying to get everybody to go to heaven, and heaven is a kind of a wonderful place. And so, if your motivation then is that, and you think your religion is the right religion that everybody needs to adopt in order for there to be social peace and harmony and everybody to get to heaven, that of course can be your entry into various sorts of politicized versions of conservatism as well. Just as on the left, you can be a nice person and think everybody should have food and roof over their head and a nice job. That can be your entry into left-wing thought as well. But we also do know that on the right, there are people who are attracted to it because they like the idea of other people burning in hell. They've got all of their resentments, and they felt disempowered maybe when they were a kid and beat up on the bullies, and God's going to get those people. And there's a psychological impulse that leads them to have this adversarial view toward the world. You can only trust your small group of people who are just like you, and everybody else is an enemy and you want them to burn. So yes, that can be a road to left, or to a certain kind of far rightism. And then I think there's a parallel one on the far left, right, where there are people who feel very inadequate in their own lives. They don't want to have to get a job. At the same time, they want all kinds of stuff, and maybe they've just been given stuff, so they've led a comfortable life, but then mommy and daddy aren't just giving them stuff anymore. But then they see there's all these people driving nice cars and becoming millionaires, but they feel inadequate and they don't want to rise up to that challenge. So they hate those people and they want them brought down. So there is this pathological version of the left as well. So I think just at the level then of it's supposed to be partly psychology, but then doing the political demographics, we're going to find on the left and the right any number of nasty groups, right, and so forth. And then
100%. Yeah.
yeah, the hard question is going to be, is the nastiness of this one nastier than the nastiness of this one? And that's going to be a very delicate judgment call. But I do think right now the far left is more dangerous than the far right.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is that what we mean by, again, far right is that we've been fighting against those guys for now 500 years. So that strong form of traditional religious authoritarian conservatism, we've been beating up on them and winning progressively over the course of 500 years. So they obviously don't go away and they make resurgences, but we know how to make those arguments.
Yep.
They're a resurgent force, where it's the left is the new kid on the block, and we're still working out, to the extent people are bewildered by all these postmodern and its offshoots arguments out there. How do we handle that? We're still learning how to do so, and so it's a more dangerous, and it's obviously, I think, at least out on the streets, a more activist threat right now.
Certainly more activists, and certainly higher numbers as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So whereas the minority rule is still the case on the right, the minority rule no longer even applies to the left because it's almost becoming the majority rule.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the long march through the institutions, capturing the high cultural institutions and education and corporate training and so forth. Yeah, that has been a success for the left.
Yeah, really well said. Thank you. Just one more for you. Now, again, it's so broad. So,
oh my goodness,
but here's the thing. I would love to hear
in 2 minutes.
Let's see if you can do it. I would love to hear whether you have any personal religious beliefs that have been influenced by your relationship with Nietzsche. Was he someone who challenged your beliefs or someone who confirmed your atheism?
Oh, come on. That's completely unfair, Ryan. That's not a 2-minute answer question.
Okay. Let me give you,
okay. I'll give you the quick and dirty version and we can talk more about it another time.
Yeah, later.
I would say that, no, Nietzsche did not change my beliefs about religion in the sense of truth or falsity, right? So I'm an atheist. I don't think there are any gods. And by the time I was,
confirm it for you, you believe
it. Right, that's right. So I had my religious education when I was young. Lots of Calvinists and Pentecostals and various other sorts of, and my parents, when I turned 13, they made me go to church every Sunday, but they said, we want you to go to a different church every week, right? So you can get your religious education. And I read the Bible and all of that sort of stuff.
Okay, proper religious education.
I did have a religious education. Of course, I read a huge amount of stuff in fiction and loved history and so on. So religious history and religious expressions of in literature are huge. So I had my views worked out on religion by the time I went to university. But what was interesting to me about Nietzsche was his functionalist understanding of religion. So here the issue is not so much, is religion true or not? Is there really a God or not? And all of those metaphysical questions and epistemological questions. And then if we're not going to get our morals from religion, where are we going to get them from? But rather, the question that I found striking from him was the question that if religion is not true, that then is to say we made it up. And what explains why we would make up the kinds of religions that we make up? And the argument is that religion is performing a certain functional role in the psychology, right, of those. So Nietzsche is, of course, a brilliant psychologist as well as being a brilliant philosopher. And so it was that psychological functionalist question about religion that I found deeply engaging as I was reading through Nietzsche. So that's the quick and dirty answer.
No, I love it. It's similar to me as well. Actually, I went to a Catholic school. Parents who say they're religious, I don't know if they actually are, but have been pretty confidently an atheist most of my life, I would say. And through Nietzsche, I would say I identify a lot with what I was thinking because I think he is also an atheist.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but yes, Steve, I won't keep you any longer. I just want to say, you saw the list of questions I had, you know, like,
Yeah,
I really,
very ambitious, great list of questions.
look,
But yeah,
I could
we had
pick
a
your
good
brain for
time.
hours, really, no problem. And I hope that you feel like this is worthwhile use of your time as well. And
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I love doing this. Yeah. Philosophy
amazing.
is, it's a rush.
Yeah, and we barely got into the philosophy as well. And I will certainly take you up on the offer of a next conversation
Okay,
whenever
good.
your
All right,
schedule
great.
allows
Well,
it.
yeah, let's look toward summer of 2021.
Lovely.
Okay. Yeah.
Anything you want to leave us with?
Um, well, I would just say I don't want to promote my my books and so on, or my my stuff on YouTube, but
That'll all be linked. Don't worry.
okay, yeah, great, yeah. For more C, X, Y,
Yep.
and Z. No, I just like to encourage people to recognize that philosophy matters more than they sometimes might think from
Mhm.
its portrayal in the popular press. And if you really want to know what's going on culturally and politically, look to last generation's philosophy and do some self-education. It will hopefully be rewarding, but also illuminating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Tough. It can be so engaging as well.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
100%.
All right. Bye for now, Ryan. Thanks a
Thank you
lot.
so much, mate. Really appreciate it. And yeah, have a brilliant time. I'll see you next summer.
Take care.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.